865 AD. A messenger finishes speaking inside a Danish longhouse. The message is simple. Ragnar Lothbrok is dead. He was not killed in battle. He was captured, stripped of armor, thrown into a pit of snakes, left to die slowly. The room does not erupt. There is no shouting, no ritual mourning. 4 men sit at the table. They are Ragnar's sons. Sigurd Snake in the Eye holds a small knife. He keeps cutting his fingernails as the words settle in. The blade slips too far, past the nail, through the skin, down to bone. He does not stop. He does not react. Across from him, Bjorn Ironside grips a chess piece carved from bone. His hand tightens. There is a crack. The piece shatters in his fist. Blood drips onto the table. This is not grief. This is calculation. They understand immediately what Ragnar's death means. King Aella of Northumbria did not just remove an enemy. He violated the rules of kingship and warfare. He denied Ragnar a warrior's death. He intended humiliation, not victory. And Ragnar, with his final breath, answered. According to the messengers, Ragnar laughed as the snakes bit into him. As the venom spread, he spoke one last sentence. How the little piglets would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffered. Aella believed he was ending a legend. Instead, he activated it. The sons of Ragnar do not discuss revenge. They do not argue over targets. There is no debate. The response is immediate and absolute. This will not be a raid for silver. It will not be a campaign for land. It will not end with a single death. This will be a war designed to erase everyone responsible. Messengers are sent out across the Viking world. Norway, Sweden, Ireland. Old rivals answer the call. Mercenaries refuse payment. Warriors arrive not for profit, but for participation. What is forming is not an army in the traditional sense. It is a convergence. And at its center is not the strongest son, nor the loudest. It is the one who does not stand. Ivar the Boneless is already planning a war that will not be fought in rage, but in sequence. By the time King Aella learns what he has unleashed, the decision has already been made. Ragnar's death is no longer an execution. It is a starting signal. Ragnar Lothbrok was not unknown to the English. He had raided their coasts for decades. He had killed their men. He had humiliated their kings. But that was not why his death mattered. What mattered was how he died. King Aella of Northumbria did not execute Ragnar as a prisoner of war. He denied him armor. He denied him a weapon. He denied him a clean death. Instead, he used Ragnar as a spectacle. Thrown into a pit of vipers, Ragnar was meant to die slowly, stripped of dignity, reduced to an object lesson. Aella wanted to show that Viking legends could be broken. That fear could be reversed. But the execution failed in its final purpose. Ragnar did not plead. He did not beg. He laughed. As the venom spread through his body, Ragnar delivered a final warning. Not a threat, a prophecy. How the little piglets would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffered. Aella misunderstood the sentence. He believed it was bravado, a dying man clinging to myth. In reality, it was information. Ragnar was not speaking to Aella. He was speaking forward in time to his sons. With that sentence, the nature of the conflict changed. Ragnar's death was no longer an endpoint. It became a trigger. In the Viking world, killing an enemy was acceptable. Killing him without honor was not. Aella had crossed a line that could not be negotiated away. The sons of Ragnar understood this immediately. There would be no compensation, no ransom, no apology sufficient to undo the violation. Only annihilation would restore balance. The response in Scandinavia was not emotional. It was logistical. Messengers were sent in every direction. The call did not promise silver. It did not promise land. It promised participation in something unprecedented. A war of vengeance. Warriors arrived from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Ireland. Rival leaders suspended feuds. Mercenaries refused payment. Men came not to raid, but to finish something. What formed was not a typical Viking force. This was not a fleet of 3 or 5 ships striking a coastline and vanishing. This was a mass movement, a coordinated deployment. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle would later call it the Great Heathen Army. To those who saw it approach, it looked less like an army and more like a migration. Hundreds of longships crossed the sea. Not only warriors disembarked, women arrived, children arrived, Blacksmiths arrived, horses were brought ashore, supplies were stockpiled. This force was not designed to loot and leave. It was designed to stay. England had faced Viking raids before. It had never faced this. Raids could be repelled. This could not. By the time English sentries realized what they were seeing, the decision had already been made elsewhere. England was no longer a target. It was a destination. At the head of this force was not Bjorn Ironside. It was not Sigurd Snake in the Eye. It was Ivar the Boneless. History has debated the meaning of his name for centuries, whether it described a disease, paralysis, or an unusual physical condition. The sagas agree on one point. Ivar could not walk like other men, but his body was irrelevant. Ivar did not command through presence. He commanded through structure. While his brothers focused on vengeance, Ivar focused on sequence. He understood that killing King Aella would require more than strength. It would require positioning. Northumbria was strong. Its fortresses were inland. Attacking directly from the sea would fail. So Ivar did something unexpected. He bypassed Aella entirely. Instead of sailing north, the Great Heathen Army landed in East Anglia. The kingdom was unprepared, outmatched, terrified. Ivar did not demand battle. He demanded horses. East Anglia submitted. Their infantry invaders became cavalry. Mobility replaced brute force. The army overwintered. Supplies were gathered, intelligence was collected. Most importantly, fear was allowed to spread. Ivar understood something his enemies did not. Waiting is a weapon. As winter passed, Northumbria waited for an attack that did not come. The absence of violence became its own form of pressure. When the army finally moved, it would move as something transformed. By the spring of 866 AD, the Great Heathen Army was no longer a collection of angry warriors. It was a professional machine. And it was ready to turn north. The Great Heathen Army did not move immediately. That delay was deliberate. While Northumbria expected a direct strike, Ivar kept his forces in East Anglia. The army trained. Weapons were repaired. Horses were broken in. Supply lines stabilized. Scouts moved north and returned with information. More importantly, rumors moved faster than armies. News spread through England that the Vikings were not raiding. They were occupying. They were staying through winter. They were building something permanent. Fear filled the gap left by silence. Ivar understood that anticipation weakens defenses more effectively than assault. Each week without an attack forced Northumbria to remain mobilized, draining resources and discipline. Each month increased uncertainty. By the time the snow melted in early 866 AD, the Great Heathen Army had changed. It was no longer a mass of warriors bound by revenge. It was mounted, supplied, organized. And Northumbria was already cracking before a single blow was struck. Northumbria was not unified when the Vikings arrived. It was divided by civil war. King Aella, the man who had executed Ragnar, was not the rightful ruler. He had seized the throne from King Osbert. The two men despised each other. Their forces were split, their loyalty fractured. While Ivar waited in East Anglia, Northumbria fought itself. This was the opening Ivar had been preparing for. Civil war paralyzes response. It drains manpower. It blinds leadership. By the time enemies unite, it is usually too late. In the autumn of 866 AD, Ivar moved. The Great Heathen Army marched north at speed, using the horses extorted from East Anglia. They bypassed smaller settlements. They did not waste time on villages. Their target was singular: York. York was the heart of Northumbria, a former Roman city, a political center, a religious symbol. Capturing it would force Aella and Osbert to respond. But Ivar did not only choose the place, he chose the day. November 1st, All Saints' Day. On that day, Northumbria's nobles, commanders, and bishops would be gathered inside churches. Weapons would be set aside, guards reduced. Attention divided. The Great Heathen Army attacked while the bells were still ringing. The city's defenses were undermanned. The gates fell quickly. There was no organized resistance. What followed was not a battle. It was a massacre. By nightfall, York was in Viking hands. But Ivar did not burn the city. That would have been the act of a raider. Instead, he occupied it. The Roman walls were repaired, granaries secured, defenses reinforced. York was converted into a fortified Viking stronghold. deep inside enemy territory. Then Ivar waited again. He sat in Aella's capital and did nothing. And exactly as planned, Northumbria was forced to stop fighting itself. Aella and Osbert had no choice. They would have to unite. They would have to march on York. And they would do it on Ivar's terms. By early 867 AD, Northumbria had no choice left. King Aella and King Osbert ended their civil war and combined their forces. Pride was swallowed. Hostility set aside. They marched north to reclaim their capital. On March 21st, Palm Sunday, the united Northumbrian army attacked York. At first, it appeared to work. The English slammed into the Roman walls with desperation. Gaps were found, gates were forced, soldiers poured into the city streets. Cheers erupted. They believed the Vikings were retreating. They were wrong. Ivar had not lost the walls. He had abandoned them. The Vikings allowed the Northumbrian army to enter the city. Once thousands of men were compressed into York's narrow streets and alleys, the trap closed. Vikings emerged from rooftops and side streets. Shield walls locked at both ends of the avenues. Escape routes vanished. York became a kill zone. Numbers ceased to matter. Long spears were useless in close quarters. Panic spread instantly. Men were crushed together, unable to swing weapons, butchered where they stood. King Osbert fought his way forward, but he was cut down in the chaos. His body disappeared beneath the feet of his own men. The Northumbrian army collapsed inside its own capital. Amid the slaughter, the Vikings were not killing indiscriminately. They were searching. The sons of Ragnar had given clear orders. One man was not to be killed. King Aella. Aella saw the destruction unfold. He saw his rival die. He understood too late that the walls he had breached were no longer defenses. They were prison walls. He attempted to retreat. Shield walls blocked every path. He was dragged from his horse, disarmed, and forced to his knees in the mud and blood of York streets. The battle was over, but Aella was not executed. That would have been mercy. He was bound in chains and taken alive. The Vikings did not look at him with rage. They looked at him with expectation. The war was finished. The ritual was about to begin. Part 10. The Blood Eagle. King Aella was brought before the sons of Ragnar. His crown was gone. His robes were torn. He was covered in filth and blood. Around him stood the chieftains of the Great Heathen Army. Bjorn Ironside watched him without expression. Ubba handled his axe. Sigurd Snake in the Eye stared in silence. Ivar the Boneless lay on a pile of furs, unable to stand, his twisted legs useless. His body was weak. His authority was absolute. No transcript survives of what was said, but the sagas describe a moment of quiet intimacy. Ivar did not shout, he did not threaten, he asked questions about the pit, about the snakes, about Ragnar's final moments. Each answer forced Aella to relive the crime he had committed. Ragnar had been denied a warrior's death. Now Aella would be denied mercy. The punishment chosen was the Blood Eagle. Aella was taken to a nearby hill. His body was forced face down. His arms and legs were staked into the ground. He was no longer a king. He was a demonstration. The execution was not a frenzy. It was deliberate. The skin of his back was cut open along the spine. The ribs were severed from the backbone, one by one, and pulled outward. Then the lungs were drawn out and draped over the broken ribs. According to later accounts, they fluttered as Aella struggled to breathe, forming the shape of wings. Whether fully literal or partially symbolic, the message was unmistakable. This was not execution. It was terror as law. When Aella died, his body was left where it fell. The debt had been paid. But the Great Heathen Army was not finished. With King Aella dead, Northumbria was broken. A conventional army would have disbanded. The debt had been paid. The execution was complete. The Great Heathen Army did not return to the sea. Instead, it turned south. In 869 AD, the army returned to East Anglia, the same kingdom that had submitted years earlier. King Edmund had given the Vikings horses in exchange for peace. He believed the agreement would protect his people. Ivar did not honor agreements with men he considered prey. This time, the Vikings did not ask for supplies. They demanded the kingdom. Edmund refused. He was a devout Christian and knew he could not win militarily, but he would not rule as a pagan subject. He was captured near Hoxne and taken alive. His execution was different from Aella's. Aella's death had been anatomical. Edmund's would be symbolic. Edmund was tied to a tree. The Viking archers formed ranks. This was not a single volley. It was repetition. They fired again and again, deliberately avoiding the heart and head. Arrows filled his arms, legs, and torso. Chroniclers later wrote that he resembled a hedgehog, pinned upright by dozens of shafts. Throughout the ordeal, Edmund prayed. That angered Ivar. Bored with martyrdom, Ivar ordered the execution to end. A swordsman stepped forward and severed Edmund's head. It was thrown into the forest to prevent burial. The message was unmistakable. There would be no neutrality. There would be no safe submission. You would die screaming like Aella or praying like Edmund. By 874 AD, 2 of England's 4 great kingdoms were effectively gone. Northumbria existed only as a Viking-controlled puppet. East Anglia was a graveyard. Next was Mercia. King Burgred of Mercia watched what had happened to Aella. He saw what had happened to Edmund. He understood the pattern. He chose not to fight. As the Great Heathen Army advanced toward Repton, Burgred abdicated his throne. He took what gold he could carry and fled to Rome. He died there in exile. Mercia fell without a battle. Fear accomplished what armies did not. The map of England changed rapidly. Nearly the entire island was now under Viking control. Only one kingdom remained independent, Wessex. If Wessex fell, England would cease to exist as a political entity. It would become an extension of Scandinavia. The Great Heathen Army turned south again, but in Wessex, they encountered something new. Wessex was not ruled by a tyrant like Aella, nor a martyr like Edmund, nor a coward like Burgred. It was defended by a young prince named Alfred. At the time, Alfred was not called the Great. He was physically weak, plagued by illness, and overshadowed by his warrior brother, King Ethelred. But Alfred understood something Ivar respected: strategy. When the Vikings attacked Wessex in 1871, the fighting was brutal and inconclusive. Losses were heavy on both sides. Unlike the other kingdoms, Wessex resisted. When Ethelred died, Alfred became king in the middle of the war. He made a decision that shocked his contemporaries. He paid the Vikings to leave. The Danegeld was enormous. Critics later called it cowardice. But Alfred's choice was different from Burgred's. Burgred paid to escape. Alfred paid to buy time. He knew he could not defeat the Great Heathen Army in open battle. Not yet. He needed to reorganize his forces, build defenses, and study his enemy. As the Vikings accepted the silver and settled into their conquered lands, Alfred prepared in silence. The sons of Ragnar had achieved their revenge, but in doing so, they had created the conditions for their own resistance.